So, welcome everyone. Second day. So, hopefully, you guys will have some questions for the panel. Ready? No? No? No one wants the questions? No. Okay, well. That's it. We're done. So, sorry? Go on, go on. Oh, breakfast. Oh, we've done that. Oh, the sausage rolls are good. Out of all of these we take, sausage rolls were good. So the question is, should we cancel this and just do karaoke? Ben? Ben? Cool. So I suppose, should we just talk about what you're doing out there as far as...
Just do an AMA.
Yeah.
Ask me anything.
Oh, okay.
Oh, ask them anything.
It's easier than talking about macOS.
No questions, huh? Oh, I'll tell you what, you ask someone else in the panel. Let's try that.
You can ask us anything.
No. Morning.
Hey.
Okay, so who wants to answer the following? Is this working? Yeah, all right. So is the change that we're seeing, with everything we were talking about yesterday, with DP and everything else, is it a good thing or a bad thing for a Mac admin? Do we like it or not?
Yeah, so what's your opinion on it?
So I'll take a shot at answering that. The answer is it's both, and like so many different changes that we get from that are essentially enforced on our environment, we have no choice as to whether or not they're good or bad changes. All we can see is dealing with what we were presented. I mean, I was talking with Joe Chilcott about this, and Apple's always been a bit of a black box, and it's just that we're losing sockets on the side. And so that can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. If Apple is really out there to preserve the, shall we say, the consumer experience for your environment, your ability to alter that consumer experience is changing. And we get opportunities to either say, yes, this is something that we can deal with, or it's something that we have to kind of struggle with and figure out new ways around. In a lot of ways, we're in a space where now we have fewer tools and we have to invent new tools. And when we're pushed to invent new tools, when we're pushed to invent new methodologies, I actually kind of dig that, because I feel like that's when our ingenuity shows us, shows our bosses even that we're valuable. And so in terms of finding a way to be valuable right now, it's harder. But there are ways to do it, and there are ways that make sense. So is DEP the way to go? Is DEP only the way to go? Well, we don't seem to have another choice. So, I mean, well, we do. And, if you missed Graham's talk about yesterday about, looking at other platforms, now's a good time to look around. Same thing. So. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I mean, one of the things as well is DP is the way to go. To paraphrase, I think it was Marcus said this, but it's DP or GTFO, right? Which is great. But when you've got Macs in territories where there is no DP, that's going to be the challenge. So unless Apple try and open up stuff such as like the configurator enrollment for iOS into DP or something along those lines, there's going to be challenges. I think we're just in a massive transition period right now. I mean, imaging kind of netboot kind of works. Imaging like an ASR restore of an APFS volume isn't really the way to be doing it. You need to be installing the OS to get the right firmware, and it will then do the kind of APFS transition, etc. if you need it. But that's kind of dying now. So if you're like net booting machines in a lab to image them, that way is kind of going now. So now you need to look at DP. Now you need to look at user experience. When you do a DP enrollment, they get to the desktop. Bosh, what happens? How are you going to alert people? Do you look at Dep Notify, Splash Buddy? We've done our own progress screen. It's those kind of things where that whole journey is now changing quite a lot. And I think we're all waiting for the erase content and settings button. macOS, device comes in, provision it to a user, there's all the UAMDM stuff, next user, hit the button, and let them go through that step again. I think anybody thinks that that's not an unreasonable thing to come. But again, it still changes. Now, I think in a lab, if you can probably get your workflows to work where you're still spending as much time per Mac as if you were when you were holding down the button to netboot. And obviously this is going back far from where we used to be able to netboot them remotely on mass and trigger off the whole workflow. But it's still, for kind of technician time, it might be down to the minutes again to get a machine to a state. But yeah, it's quite interesting right now. We're pushing people towards DEP and those kind of workflows. And I've said labs a lot, but that's where we've been doing that quite a lot recently, in the hope that that's going to work longer term for them better than trying to get a netboot server up and running across their VLANs in a horribly hostile netboot or hostile to netboot environment. But I imagine that's going to be challenging for a number of folks. Kind of, if you're in education, and how many folks with labs have kind of been doing DEP deployments? Neil and Yannis. Is that it? No. Anyone else here? Well, who's in education or has a kind of lab scenarios, lab enrollments? Okay, and so you folks are basically doing just kind of your netboot imaging, or are you kind of doing like no imaging workflows? How are you provisioning those devices? Don't all speak up at once.
Yeah, don't all speak at once. So we got one Casper imaging. Anyone else? Imager in DP. Right, so you got imager taking the machine back to a factory state. Then you're going through the DP process, okay? And then Casper Imaging, which is doing your ASR restores, doesn't actually support installing the OS. And that's where we're going to run into those potential difficulties with the changes coming with the new installers and the new thing. We spoke about this yesterday, hadn't we? There's you've got time to play with new stuff now. So Diane, you spoke about yesterday how you attacking this and how you setting up your guys with really.
Did I speak about that yesterday?
Yeah, go on.
Oh, okay.
Go for it.
Our environment's strange as well because we have remote employees. We provision used laptops for them. We have brand new in the box for employees in office. And we're in that weird struggle right now too with DEP. Some of our devices are DEP, of course, the newest ones. Certain countries don't have it, so now we have to think about, we use Casper Imaging sometimes, we use Restore, and it's just messy. Like the whole process of deciding which one, what to choose, and we have a specific onboarding that's, really nice in our offices, right? We have like an hour dedicated to setting up laptops, understanding security, and all this stuff, and, you have a device that now we're considering deploying Splash Buddy, and doing some testing with Nomad Login, all that kind of stuff. And I'm thinking how beautiful a process it is to get a user to sign in with their Okta account, and then get Splash Buddy to take over and do everything else while we can talk to them about security, we can talk to them about our culture, all that kind of stuff. And yet I can't have the same process for my remote employees, obviously. So we're in a very weird place because of the same issues, and I could say that I would love to, throw out all the non-DEP devices and just buy new ones. But now I'm in that stage as well where I'm unsure how to go forward so we can sort of streamline the process for everyone around the countries, right? So I'm open to alternatives and in devices as well because it is, you get to a point, and I guess when you do get pigeonholed. Do you decide to just put your eggs in one basket and continue, or do you decide that maybe there is other things out there that could work better for you, right? Like, Google and stuff. So,
cool.
I think that in a lot of ways, Apple's always been an aspirational company, and that they have an aspirational view of the future, and they will set the goalposts well out into the field, and essentially expect you to kind of figure out how you're getting there. And they don't always provide a roadmap. They don't tell you where the tacklers are. They don't tell you where the problems are. They basically have decided that's not their job. Their job is to be the goalposts. And so, we see these situations where we get a bit of a kind of a self-own almost, wherein we don't have DEP everywhere that we need it. We don't have VPP even everywhere we need it. And they've set out this view for the future that's very, I guess, they figured out how to do it in the U.S. They haven't figured out how to do it in, for EMEA. They haven't figured out how to do it for outside of the United States yet, at least not in its entirety. And so I feel like we get an incomplete picture of the future and it's almost like we have an unreliable narrator telling us the story. And those two things together kind of cause their own problems. Because we don't have the full picture of the security story, we don't have the full picture of the management story, and we don't have a good picture of the hardware story either right now. This is a really scary time to do what we do because the stakes are higher. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about what you guys have seen in terms of security stuff in the last 6 months? Because I bet you've had some interesting stories.
With regards to like the Mac, or I mean, there's all kinds of things going on with security on the Mac. I think you alluded to it being higher stakes. So, there's never been more Macs in the enterprise and organizations out there. So everything's much higher profile. So I probably have a different experience than a lot of people do because, we're based in San Francisco, and like a San Francisco company, we are basically all on Macs, right? So, we can do it well. We can keep things up to date. It's not really a huge problem for us. But there continue to be like a lot of attackers that, have changed their focus from generic Windows attacks to actual, real things against the Mac because they know who the companies they are that they're targeting, that they can't hit them with, Java applets and Word macros anymore. Like, that's just not going to work because it's not there. So there's rootkits, there's all kinds of things out there. I can't really speak specifically about exact things I've seen, but they definitely do exist out there. But I guess with the changes to the Mac, what I would say is that it's always been our jobs to stay on top of changes, and the deployment changes aren't really out of line with things that we've had to do before. Like, I was thinking back to changes from like Snow Leopard to Lion, and CF Prefsty came out, and nobody really understood that, and it was like a software change in the background, and we were all kind of used to deploying preferences by like dropping P lists in places, and you were like, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and if you were in the know, then you knew that you couldn't really do that anymore. But if you were kind of in the know, you kept doing it and just killed the process every time you changed something, which was not right. But I think the real role of a Mac admin is to keep adapting to change and not being upset because there is change. Like, that's kind of what your job is, but also just like kind of why it's interesting. It's not, the classic Windows world where, you could kind of stick with a deployment mechanism and everything was the same for 10 years. I don't think it's ever really been like that on the Mac, and it probably never will be. And I think we end up in a much better place because of it.
Now, regarding what Tom was saying, one of the things I find, I don't know about you guys, but is a lack of documentation from Apple. And I'm back on the times of 10.3s and 10.5s, where you actually used to get documentation. But nowadays, you just can't find anything. Yannis, what's your opinion on all of this?
Well, that's why we have a much better community than the Windows sort of thing, say, for example, or other platforms for that matter. The lack of documentation is, always interesting when you come up against something that Apple, pretend doesn't exist, and it does happen. Let's be honest. But then you have so many places to go to and so many people to speak to, and you always find an answer that usually leads you back to Rich Troughton's blog, 8 times out of 10. And then you're very good as well. Yes. No, I think okay. This is more of a problem for situations where you have to say present I don't know, a big system architecture to senior managers or someone who runs a business, because they feel this it is better if there is backup from, say, Apple, in the same way that Microsoft always backed up their enterprise side of the business. But for us as Mac admins, I don't know. I don't feel that it's as much of a problem as it.
I mean, on the documentation front, just James, we alluded to it yesterday in our talk. Apple's saying the 17 range is theirs. Well, it is, but then they throw everything behind different CDNs and stuff. So if you have someone who's limiting access out to Apple over 17 only, there's going to be delays and some things will fail. But there's nothing anywhere from Apple that states that. But you can just do a simple kind of. If you go to Rich Purvis's blog, he's done a fantastic job with a couple of hundred DNS entries. You can kind of do a look up against them and find out actually where they sit. You'll find that I think it's about half or so, roughly, actually do sit outside of Apple space. But there's nowhere it's documented, and I've been bugging people about that, filtering it through the channels that I know, but still, no documents kind of materialise that kind of explains that, and that makes people uncomfortable. There was a talk we did at London Apple Admins that Yannis had hosted, and his colleague Terence was talking about autopilot and Windows deployment. Essentially, DEPs coming to Windows. But in the way, when you look at the networking and all that, they're a lot clearer actually on what goes where. And that's from the off, which is just a complete different disparity there between the two organizations, between Apple and Microsoft, and how they approach these things. But straight away, I mean, it's almost, Microsoft's thing is almost a bit enterprise first, really, in some regards. And, for us, we as a group, we're kind of filling that void from Apple's side, which has its challenges, which is fun. I just wanted to ask one thing. How many folks here are not using MDM currently? Right. So that might be where some of the bigger challenges come from. Obviously, we're talking about like reading tea leaves and seeing where Apple are going with things. It's very, very, very clear now that MDM is a framework that you need to be actually using now. And with that will come your DEP and VPP. But if you fundamentally aren't able to use MDM to manage your devices, I think you're gonna be struggling a bit. There are other methods that are still working right now, but if Apple are making these pushes for everything with UA MDM, Tim4, how long are we going to have to be able to use those other tools that allow us to do things locally?
There are a lot of really good options right now in the MDM space. What are you guys using?
We use Jamf. And the thing with us is, if you don't know anything about Shopify where I work, we're very open culture. We don't deploy a lot. And so it makes me question, why am I using Jamf? So now that there are so many solutions out there, it is a time to sort of reflect and decide, am I getting everything I want? It's really great that I get DEP, but now I can get DEP with other, vendors. And would also put people's mind at ease that there's no binary running on their device, which I don't use anyways. So yeah, I would agree with you. I think now's the time for us to also start analyzing the solutions that work and the vendors that are more excited to help us with problems that we may have, or removing features that we don't need. And I think it sort of reminds me of identity managers and all that kind of stuff. We deal with that as well, and we're trying to find the best solution that is willing to cater to us and really do what our environment needs. Like, for Okta, there's 1,000,001 beta features and EAs and all that kind of stuff that I use regularly, or I get lists of regularly, and I go, hey, like, can you just modify it in this specific way? Because I think this would be useful. And people who are very open to how dynamic the current environment of management and cloud is, like, that's the way to go. So Jamf, but we'll see.
Sure. So for our Macs, we are using MicroMDM. I I think we landed there for a lot of reasons, but a really big portion of that is just being able to adapt it to what our needs really were and will continue to be in the future. I mean, obviously, MDM is really going to be needed in the future. As of like today in early 2018, you still don't really need it. You can get by without it. I would still call it like a nice to have at this point, but you should. It's like a nice to have for your individual organization, but you should have it. So for us, we didn't really need it to do a bunch of things initially, and we wanted to be able to adapt it in ways that we could in the future instead of really being bound to a single vendor for eternity, which is the current case for MDM enrollments, especially in the UA MDM world, because you can't, use an MDM to switch to another UA MDM at this time. We've always kind of had this basis in the open source world, but we don't just use open source to use open source. It's really so we can get exactly what we need out of it. And there just wasn't really any commercial products that met our needs long term.
Now, everyone is starting to awake. We got a question back up there.
Is this working?
No.
No? So, I'm of the opinion that at the moment and going forward, you should be obviously following a direction that we kind of are perceiving that Apple are taking with regard to deploying devices. So you can kind of see the writing on the wall. You kind of think, okay, cool, I'm going to go in this particular direction. I'm going to deploy devices in this particular way. I'd just be interested to hear if there was any of you guys that were doing anything that was still considered maybe a little bit out of the ordinary, that, maybe doing some modification of a SIP protected area in your environment, and how you feel like that's going to go in the future, and if you've got any plans for that. Does that make sense?
So, like going against the writing on the wall?
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So no one's doing that kind of stuff anymore?
We might have historically have done things like modifying the assistance, the accessibility database thing back on customer systems that run in 10.9. I mean, we got customers who education and their machines are working fine with CS4, so they're still running CS4 and they obviously can't upgrade the OS and all the rest of it. So we got some older kind of methods which were perfectly acceptable back then for that OS. But as we bring them up into a more current OS, those are things that go by the wayside, and we just look at alternatives that we can work with within the new set of rules. So that's been interesting. The other thing for us was we were trying to standardize our workflows. So it's kind of what Dan's saying on there about if we've got, again, where we're employed, basically, we're employed like managed service. So we're employed to look after the Apple devices for a company. And that could be a large company where they've just got like an IT department that don't care about Macs, Apple devices, and they want us to help them out. Or it could be a small company that just doesn't really got an IT person, through to schools, etc. So a lot of the people we deal with really aren't Apple literate. So we've had to do this whole thing of standardizing our workflows to bring it in. So we've got a progress screen that we do that is for user-initiated enrollment. So that's, if you're not using Jav, that's going to a web portal and kind of enrolling that way. Post-imaging and for post-DEP. So we've tried to kind of bring things together and to standardize in that way, which I know typically progress screens are used just for post-DEP, but we've just kind of gone, you know what, this actually works across, so this just standardize across, and we're trying to bring those workflows in. But as much as possible, we're trying to shift people from those older requirements where you might have stuff to do with SIP disablement and all that. In fact, we don't have any workflows that require any of that at the moment. I don't know if our customers might be to get that bit working. They might be doing CSR util stuff. If you've got someone who's a bit more technically au fait, but generally, no, it's a hard push almost. It's like, say, you want to do that thing, you can't do that thing anymore. Hey, but we can do it in this way, or we can achieve this, or maybe speak to that app developer about doing that in a different way.
Yeah, just a quick point on that one. That used to happen a lot in previous years, and we see less and less of it. And one of the reasons, and one of the say fallacies, if you like, is that usually that happens when you have a human process, a business process that that wants to bend technology, right? You have a product that you want to use. You don't want to use it in the way that it's intended, in the way that it's designed, for whatever reason. And what you try to do is you try to hack basically that process, that system and the design to fit your needs. I think it's a good thing that this sort of thing doesn't happen as much anymore, because it allows us to move past that and focus on actually using it rather than trying to modify it to achieve something that maybe shouldn't be there in the first place.
So, quick survey. Who here alters the user template anymore? Who here used to? That's your answer, generally speaking. That was a solution for a time when we needed that as a solution. We don't need that as a solution anymore, much as we don't necessarily need to turn off system integrity protection to make alterations to certain parts of the directory. We have other options to get to those solutions. And, Apple's pointing us towards, hey, no more kernel extensions. And so, I mean, we've got, I guess, what do we want to call it this week? Ukulele, Skell, or however we want to, call it. But, Apple's kind of pointing us towards, hey, if you use kernel extensions, maybe those might not be something that's in your future, which is kind of a panic for me, because we have a VPN that requires a kernel extension, and who will likely continue to require a kernel extension. So we've been following user-accepted, kernel extension loading pretty closely, just for exactly that reason. And for our clients that don't have an MDM, well, now they need one. And this is the kind of push to get over that hurdle. And do I necessarily like having to tell my clients that they need to spend $30 a device per year? Not really. But I also feel like there are ways to defray that and, get benefit from that they wouldn't have gotten other places.
So we got another question up here.
It's more of a comment to what Tom just said. I built a workflow in November with net install to disable ukulele, or whatever you want to call it, and it worked great. And net install is one of Apple's supported ways. But then, of course, with the iMac Pro, you look at that and say, well, this works great for the existing Macs, but it won't for the future Macs. And I think we're living in a spot right now where we're not seeing the entire picture of where Apple is planning to go with all of these things. We see outlines, we see ideas, and certainly everything isn't in place. And that's very, very frustrating. But we don't see the entire picture yet.
Well, exactly. And in a lot of ways, we're out at sea. And, we don't know where the coastline is. There are no lighthouses. I mean, there are a few lighthouses, but not enough of them. And that's the future we live in. And I think that's okay.
So I would look at what the competitive landscape looks like for what Apple might be doing in the future, and like what everybody else is doing. So right now, I think there's really 4 realistic platforms that an organization can use for end user devices. That'd be macOS, iOS, Windows, and now Chrome OS. And they all have their positives and negatives. But I think with the way that Apple's moving, I've heard, and Apple doesn't really say it publicly, but they want to make the Mac as secure as iOS. And that does involve some concessions, and it might not look exactly as the Mac does today, but they want it to still be a general compute platform. And very user-friendly. But if you look at what else is going on, if you see what Google's doing with secure boot everywhere, and really trusted devices, trusted endpoints, it's really great. Apple's moving in the same direction. On macOS, they already have it with iOS, and I think that Windows continues to be kind of behind there. Google almost has a DP-like experience, Microsoft is gaining one that I think only works with Azure AD right now. So that's kind of behind, but Microsoft is kind of chasing along with similar things to what's going on, but we'll continue to see the Mac be ahead, and I think we'll continue to see organizations that want to have more Macs. It's really not the 11 Macs in the art department anymore. It's, everybody wants one, and you can really get your work done on it, and Apple wants it to be in a better place. So I don't remember what my point was, but
Go, one more lead.
Yeah, so I know we talked about if you can manage Macs, if you're still using old tools or working around things. And I know going forward, if you really squint and read the tea leaves, it seems like if you're doing anything that doesn't go through an MDM, you're doing it wrong. So I'm wondering how many people are doing things that don't involve an MDM. I know me, a lot, a ton, everything. There's a lot of root level daemons that run around, gathering data, making changes. None of it's going against SIP, but I think that's sort of an important, thought process, at least, to like plan ahead and at least think about the opportunity, the chance that things will look more like iOS, where there's no root level daemons running around making changes, there's no agents. So interesting to focus on those sort of possibilities.
Sure. And, we've heard stories before about, Apple wanting to, nix the root daemons and nix the essentially launch daemons entirely. And we might get a launch agent function still. But, that's certainly concerning because I rely on Monkey for my for my macOS deployment, period, full stop. That's where I patch from. And if I lose that particular root launch daemon, it's game over for me. It means I have to go to a Jamf. Or, I guess I don't, because their launch agent is, their root daemon would be in similar situation.
I think this is where it kind of pays to be looking at an MDM now.
Yep.
Like Sam was saying, it's not an absolute at the moment, but it's a nice to have that you should have. Start looking at MDM, start looking at VPP deployment workflows. There's changes coming with the next version of macOS, which is going to be really helpful. The next point release. Currently, VPP only works if you've got an MDM-capable user logged in. So you can't deploy an application unless someone who's MDM-capable is logged in. And for local accounts, you can only have one local account per Mac MDM-enabled. So if you're doing DEP and you can't remove the profile and all that stuff, you want to give my laptop to Yannis, we have to wipe it and go back through all that whole reprovisioning stuff just to use VPP to deploy software. And there's a change that's going to come that's going to help when you can deploy it, so you better deploy stuff at the login window. But you've still got these kind of restrictions. If you're doing iOS management, that you try and deploy stuff, it'll be device is busy because the device is locked. It's that kind of restriction. But that's completely different in line with experience that you have with something like Monkey, where there's a lot more attention about who's using the app and who isn't. Also, I mean, with VPP, you can force an app to install. And what the user tries to load it, or if they've got it loaded, they get a message telling them they have to close it, or to wait till the app's downloaded. So there's all these other things that completely changes the user experience. So I think, again, it's just tea leaves, the writing on the wall. You need to have an eye to it, and you need to kind of learn it and figure out and play about with it. It is moving, and there is the tinfoil hat kind of again thing was people saying that root agent's going to go. Other folks have said. When you look at the licensing for things like Bash and that, there's quite old copies that Apple have got within the system because of the licensing. It's GPL or something where they have to then... The GPL v3, which means they have to open source the... there's a patent thing or... Yeah. So potentially if Bash itself, the old version of Bash that's in macOS is deemed as vulnerable, and this is again real kind of out there thing. Well, why don't Apple remove Bash? Why don't it be Swift only? And then suddenly, how crippled were we going to be with no root agents?
Right.
I mean, to be honest, if we haven't got Bash, I think a lot of people are going to be stuck anyway. Forget the root agents. But you could potentially see these third-party programming languages as well potentially come out of the OS and just have Swift as the one true, and that's going to have its own set of challenges as well. So. That's probably like a 5-10 year game plan. I don't want to scare anybody, but again, the thing is, you want to be playing with MDM and figure out how that's going to work for you.
Well, and I think there's another piece of that, which is not all MDMs are created equal, and not all MDMs implement install application right now, which is really what you need in an MDM. I'll come out and I'll make the recommendation point blank. If the MDM you are using does not support install applications, why are you still paying for it?
So one quick one on this, my little soapbox. Bit of confusion here with install application and Jamf. Jamf does use install application to install its binary, but it doesn't support you using your own thing. I mean, Jamf as a product, you need to use Jamf split brain. You want to use the MDM part and the binary, but you can then use the binary to do your next thing. But I know there's a lot of people, recent Twitter discussions, and people have gone, hey, yeah, Jamf doesn't do install application, we want it. No, it does. There's a next step. There's another thing called await configuration, which you want, which is where the setup system doesn't get released until DEP's done its thing. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. But I mean, the question is this, as we all heard, Jamf likes to say Jamf and. So let's talk about that and Jamf and install application. So don't just use it to install your binary, use it to install other things through that same platform.
Just a quick point on the initial question and MDM. Something we need to keep in mind is that MDM, in its current shape, MDM was born out of iOS, right? So it's a piece of technology that is focused on a platform that doesn't have to worry about multiple users, or didn't, right? I mean, it still doesn't. Let's be honest. Have to worry about multiple users. Basically, all the things that we are used to doing on the Mac. Now, what we then had is we had the import of MDM into macOS, one feature at a time. Now, if we again indulge in reading the tea leaves and all that, who's to say, and why should we expect that MDM in 5 years' time will continue to even be called MDM when it's fully immersed into the Mac experience, right? Why not UDM? You have Universal Device Management, that is something that caters for both platforms and so on. I mean, again, you can go nuts with trying to predict the future, and that's not the point. But there is a direction that we all feel we're moving towards, and we can see certain things, and like Tom said, there are kind of lighthouses and so on. You just have to strike a balance between not worrying too much, but also not being sort of inactive and complacent, exactly, in that you don't do anything.
You just gave up here. So Yannis just gave Gartner another acronym for one of their magic quadrants, I think.
Do you think I can get copyright on it?
So if an MDM has their own agent and uses install application to install their own agent, I mean, I think the Jamf agent or the Monkey agent or whatever system you use is superior to MDM install application because it reports back to the system and I can verify that it actually has been installed.
Right now, that is true. I don't expect that to be the case forever. I do feel like that if they're going to basically say the way you get software on this machine is through either VPP or install application, that cannot, the current environment cannot stand. Because it is, I mean, if you've tried to use install application with more than one package at a time, you'll recognize you hit a race condition, and you might get the first package, but you'll never get the rest of them. And so, it won't retry. So, I mean, there's a fundamental change that has to happen to the MDM specification and to install application as a whole to do stateful reporting with regards to install application target. So, do I want to see that yesterday? Absolutely. And will it be required if that's the new way to do things? Yes. That's a minimum viable product.
Just to say big shout out to Eric Gomez. If you folks haven't read his blog, if you go to the Install Applications channel in Slack, he's done a lot of great blog posts on this and
yes,
dug in
100%. And they're absolutely critical to using DEP to install more than one agent or more than one package. And it's a really, really clever piece of software engineering, wherein essentially you feed it a JSON feed full of packages, it downloads them, and essentially won't stop running the launch agent until they actually function and the receipts are filed.
Probably a closer, I guess, but what's the most exciting community developed piece of software you think that will be coming up this year? Or if you're not excited by anything, what would you like to see come out of the community?
I guess I'm a bit jaded.
Go
on. I really love Splash Buddy. I think it's a tool that we really needed for a long time, especially in our environment. And it helps us with transparency of what's going on with our devices. So that's something I'm really excited for, and I think just seeing the community being excited for it, that it started really small and now people are really into making it better and bigger. So yeah, so that's the big one for me.
Talk about that in a bit. Yeah. I was going to try and do like a smart comment, like I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. No, there's a couple of my projects have kind of died off a bit. You know, 80 past ones been surpassed massively by Nomad. Or Casper MBI, Auto Imager MBI, probably not much excuse for me to kind of invest more time in them. I don't know how long they'll be around. They function great till you get to about 10.13 anyway. So yeah, but it gets to the point of when you look at macOS Server. Has everybody seen the changes that are coming in macOS Server 5.4? 5.5. Or listen more intently to the podcast than what I did, and the team were talking about it. If you haven't, there's a KB article for it's just called "Changes Coming in macOS Server" or something like that. Basically, there's a whole heap of stuff that Apple are removing from macOS Server. The only bits that are kept are the bits that you really don't want to use. So, Profile Manager, Open Directory.
Well, I mean, you do get this will be the rewrite of Profile Manager. And so it's not going to be just a bunch of cobbled together scripts from multiple old languages.
17
it's all
languages.
rewritten in Swift. So, I mean, the version of Profile Manager might be worth the price of entry, but that's going to be it. Everything else died. And, you know, alas, poor Yorick, I knew him.
So we've seen Ben Goodstein's talk yesterday. He was talking about the kind of the replacements and that, and we have a need for us for what we do is we have an on-site appliance that replicates our environment, and I was going to try and make that Docker based. And the idea of having like a Docker host with multiple containers is kind of against Docker, but the idea was you'd have a Docker run file, and then we could easily just pull in what we need. Also, I'm a maintainer of NetSUS, but my idea was actually to kill off NetSUS. But the Jamf Pro Services team of folks need something again where they can offer people. So why not again maybe a Docker host? So they just put a Docker file in and pull down the stuff from the Mac admin's Docker repo. So that's a project I'm hoping to try and work on this year and hopefully release. I'm excited about my own prospect. I like doing these things. So yeah, just finding a niche and a thing. So that's mine.
I was going to go with FlashBuddy actually because it's an interesting project and they've achieved a lot and the quality is very good. But generally I do like the developments in that sort of space and trying to integrate this whole DEP, everything we talked about, and trying to kind of inject slices of very very specific functionality that we need that. Again, it goes against how Apple designs stuff, but it doesn't hack it, right? It doesn't break the process. What you do is you add value to the whole thing by little pieces of engineering. So yeah, Nomad is a good example, and all the stuff that Joel was talking about yesterday morning is genuinely really interesting. So yeah, that space is
cool. So we're kind of running out of time now. So I'm just looking at Slack. I got 2 comments. One in there is that it's Neil's birthday. So and no one knows.
Happy
Say
birthday.
Happy birthday to Bill.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Neil. Happy birthday to you.
Cool. And the other one, someone is looking for a partner to go and have some curry. So. Have a look at Slack.
Oh, there's a curry thing. Oh, is that done? Is that closed now? The curry club.
Till noon.
Till noon. There's a link going around from Graham for a curry club thing. I think he'll just post it back in the Mega channel. And just say as well. So Neil, for those of you who don't know him, he's also the latest admin on the Mac admin Slack as well. So me and him kind of cover GMT and make sure you lot all behave.